How's it going? I'm Syl. My talk is on atmospheric plugin design, which really sounds like I'm trying to control the weather. That is not, in fact, what this talk is about. This talk is about trying to evoke an emotion or atmosphere via a plugin. But before we get into that, I'll just go over the sections briefly. So I'm going to start talking about the motivation behind this and my kind of background, my kind of journey into this sort of, I guess, ethos or whatever. Next up, the elevator pitch, and take a bit of a case study then in our plugin Inferno, and then some final thoughts. So, background time. When I was in college, I was doing sound engineering. And one thing that really struck me about the course was that idea you get from musicians where they ask you to put some sort of abstract adjective on your instrument. So they might ask for a warm guitar sound or a crisp drum sound, something like that. And I really love the idea of taking that idea and running with it and interpreting it in my own creative ways. Hence, can we add a little more biohazard to the guitars? The drums sound a little Sisyphean. Can we add some more turmoil to them? My influences with this are really music I find particularly atmospheric. Bands like Godspeed, Black Emperor, Sun, Burial, and other plugin companies as well. Freak Show Industries, I think, do a fantastic job of conveying this sort of eldritch terror through their plugins in this sort of unhinged way. And another one is a video game called Duskers, which is essentially you operating drones on a spaceship in a sort of alien-esque world. But all of these things put you in a world and are super immersive and make you believe you're there. Another thing is I used to work for a company called Collide, still do sometimes. And this was really where I cut my teeth with audio programming. The client's requests were often very sort of open to interpretation. It would be, oh, can we make some sort of nice sounding distortion? And it's kind of like, well, what makes a nice sounding distortion? So you kind of apply that lens of interpretation. You're like, oh, well, nice sounding. Maybe you want it to sound like an amp that's exploding or something like that, and applying that to it. So yeah, the crux of all of this being the perspective shift of, instead of plugins being tools for musicians, treating them as pieces of art in and of themselves. So rather than, I want to make a really nice soft clipper, you say something like, I want something that sounds like someone being decapitated. But you imprint this sort of artistic fingerprint on people's music. And that's what really excites me, I guess, about this, is that idea that, despite the fact that it might be buried in a mix, your baby is in there somewhere and it's got its own identity. The other thing is, I think it's quite amusing. I have quite an unhinged sense of humor, as you'll see by my extremely, gradually more nonsensical bullet points that will appear on the screen, sort of descent into madness. And I guess it appeals to me to have an element of satire or subversion, I guess. Like, doing this as a passion project, there's a certain amount of my own kind of personality that bleeds through. So here's the elevator pitch then. The last recorded use of the guillotine was on the 10th of September in 1977 in Marseille. What if we turned it into an effect? Rather than starting from the type of effect, the idea is to start with a mood, goal, statement, or emotion. And you kind of then can use pre-established effect types like chorus, distortion, flanger, whatever, as almost Lego bricks to kind of click together, be like, oh, I'll have a little bit of this, what I call the Mambo No. 5 approach, a little bit of reverb in my life. So that kind of approach. Some other examples of this that got discarded as the title of this slide were, let's make the sound of 6,000 rubber chickens being blasted with a water cannon, or let's recreate that really irritating announcer in the Phantom Menace's pod racer scenes, hopes and dreams. The other great thing about this is its subjectivity. You could give this to two developers and say, hey, make me something that sounds like, the Phantom Menace's pod racer announcer. And my pod racer announcer might be completely different to your pod racer announcer. And that's okay, because that's where we get our creative expression, our personal expression through this. My final one of these was 3,000 amateur guitarists playing Freebird at once. another plugin idea. So, moving on to Inferno. This was essentially, we asked the question, what if the 9 circles of hell from Dante's Inferno were a multifx plugin? And this is not for any religious reasons, any reasons along those lines. It was sheer curiosity. And to be honest with you, I decided I wanted to pitch an ADC talk. And I was like, I'd like to make a plugin around some sort of theme. And I kind of panicked and went, yeah, Inferno, that sounds great. Hadn't actually read it. And yeah, so a little bit of background about this. What is Inferno? If you haven't heard of it, it's a 14th century Italian poem. It was actually the first one written in modern day Italian. It's part of a trilogy Dante Alighieri wrote called The Divine Comedy. And there was Inferno, which is the one I'm focusing on, which was about his descent into hell. There was Purgatorio. I'm going to butcher the Italian, but, you know, it's just, you know. So that's his Purgatory. And finally, Paradiso. But, you know, me being me, I was like, smiling imp emoji, it's hell time. Another thing to know, the punishments. So each circle of hell has its own kind of ironic punishment, which they're sometimes pretty weird and don't really match what he's, you know, they're called contrapassos. There's some more stuff about Alighieri's history, which I probably won't go too deep into, but a lot of Inferno really is colored by his experience in 14th century Florence and his exile from the city and stuff. So it's the sort of thing where I started actually reading it and went, oh, wait, I don't know any of this stuff. This is not as entertaining as I'd hoped. So why is Inferno? I already mentioned this. I kind of blurted out Inferno, and I knew loosely about the 9 circles of hell, but, you know, not much else. I hoped 9 circles would give me enough room for expression and creativity. And finally, yeah, it's quite on brand. Little did I know that a lot of Inferno has not aged super well. His views on sexuality, mental health, other religions, not great. Really characterized by him, I guess, being around during the time of the Crusades. You know, Inferno was written just after the fall of Acre, which was a whole thing I'm not going to go into. And I'm not touching any of this with a 10-foot pole, but I thought it was worth acknowledging that there was a lot of the source material that I kind of had to be like, see ya. So, getting on to actually making the plugin. A loosely formulated idea from reading it, but decided I definitely wanted to collaborate. SLM Audio, my company, is very based around collaboration stuff. So, the team, we've got me, we've got my friend Lucius, who's an esteemed League of Legends player, and finally, this guy. Yeah, so the idea of collaborating on something like this really appealed to me because it almost acts as an anvil to hammer out and temper ideas that, you know, any of us throw out an idea, the rest of us bash the idea until it sort of fits in some sort of cohesive shape. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So I had planned to focus on 1 or 2 circles as separate plugins. You know, I was like, oh, I'll keep things easy to myself until in comes Geraint. And it's like, what if instead you did 9 circles of hell and made it a single multi-effect plugin? So he's the devil on my shoulder on this. And a lot of the planning and calls and stuff were with these guys. Had a shared Google Doc, Discord, Slack, various kind of communication things. And we started formulating the actual ideas. So the vision. I'm going to go through the 9 circles of hell briefly and talk about what goes on in them, in case you're not familiar. So we start in limbo. Limbo is weird because there's no real kind of definitive punishment. And in fact, it seems like Dante was kind of like, I kind of feel bad for these people, but they're still sinners. I'm going to put them in hell, but like, okay hell. So it's uncharacteristically non-hellish and kind of sympathetic, characterized by this idea of the harrowing of hell, which is when Christ went into hell and rescued a load of people when he was in the cave, you know, during Easter. It's aka what I did during my Easter holidays. The predominant emotion really being like a kind of sense of weariness, melancholy, and anticipation as well. Next one, lust. This one, people are trapped in a hurricane of human bodies and they get real dizzy until Judgment Day. This one is dominated by a conversation with Francesca de Rimini, who is another historical figure, murdered by her husband after having an affair with his brother. It got real messy. Dante blames it all on a book, which, you do you, Chief. This is really characterized by, the storm was what we want to focus on. So we thought spatial positioning, kind of auto-wire, sort of noise, swirling, and chaos. I don't know if any of you know the band Grinderman. It was kind of one of our big references, this kind of wall of swirling, horrible guitars. Gluttony. Gluttony is people are in a swamp, kind of like Shrek, and they're being pummeled by filthy hail and stagnant water and all these nice things. He really loves to talk about how filthy it is. And focuses, again, he's not very descriptive about a lot of these. He just kind of focuses on conversations with people so he can kind of give out about the politics of the time. Not the best for making effects, but the filthy hail and stuff, that's usable. We decided to take the route of granular processing for this with pitch shifting and various things along those lines that I'll touch on properly later. Greed. Hoarders and overspenders push boulders into each other. I don't know. He doesn't really have much to say about it either. He's just chats to his mate about fortune for the entire thing. But it's, you can kind of infer there's a focus on conflict and kind of inequality. Geraint took charge of this one and wanted to develop a kind of chain link phaser, which I will not do justice if I explain it, but essentially the idea of sonically recreating two things charging at each other. That's the idea there. Anger. The wrathful fight each other on the surface of the river Styx, etc., etc. The sullen gurgle below the water. I'm going to start going a bit quicker through these because I have a lot written about these. But this we wanted to deal with a high and low split to kind of represent that the people under the water who are really sullen versus the angry people on the surface. This was probably our least developed one in planning. We had a vague idea about the high end being kind of a bit crush sort of thing, the low end having this gurgling, bubbling kind of muddiness and sort of apathy, that kind of thing. Heresy. Burning coffins. It's just people in burning coffins, really. It's for people who don't believe in the persistence of the soul, and there's this theme of eternity that keeps coming up through this. So eternity, we're like, well, we can do something with that. The idea here was to have a drone as the eternity and add some sort of fiery, sort of distortion-y something. Violence. Violence is he's just thrown all of his horrible ideas in one circle of hell. Been like, what? Okay, but what if these people do this? There's blood rivers, an eternal battle, a forest where people are turned into trees and pecked by harpies. There's burning sand, there's burning rain, and this is really where Dante gets a little bit problematic. So I'm just going to pretend that doesn't exist. And it's this, I guess, abstract idea of violence. For me, it kind of gives me loud amps, kind of sun, sort of wall of noise sort of thing. But I thought it would be quite interesting to take into account isolation and that kind of idea of the forest, these people in eternal kind of tree state, I don't really know, and being pecked, and that kind of hopelessness was really what I wanted to focus on there. We're nearly there, I promise. Fraud. There's even more in fraud. There's 10 subdivisions, all sorts being punished here in various ways, including whipping, excrement, burning feet, contortion, lakes of boiling pitch, diseases. Woo! It's too varied to cover everything. And I guess the problem with this one is there's not really a unified mood. It's a bit of a mess. It's very hard to come up with a single thing that's happening. But we sort of had the vague idea of fraud being the disintegration of relationships in general, which is what someone on Wikipedia told me. So that idea of collapse was really our idea for that, and using things like, reversing certain snippets of the audio and, degrading certain repeats and that kind of thing. So I know this is all very vague. We did write some code, I promise. The last one is treachery. There's also a bunch here, but it's pretty much everyone encased in a lake of ice, which is weird because hell is usually fire and brimstone. But Dante was like, no, let's freeze them. So he froze them. And we really wanted to roll with this and take influence from Grime's sort of glassy sounds, that kind of icy, kind of high-end sparseness and that kind of thing. There's also Satan. He lives there. He's got 3 heads. He's eating Judas and then also the 2 people who killed Caesar, or 2 of the people that killed Caesar. He really loves Julius Caesar. There is my whistle-stop tour of our planning, the GUI. So we wanted to adhere to this atmosphere of the source material, which, as you can probably tell, is quite bleak, quite grim. And I was like, it would be so easy to just fill the GUI with like flames and clip art of like Satan looking really menacing and stuff. But we kind of, as you'll see, we sort of went through a few ideas on this. But there was an emerging theme with the effects, kind of tying them all together, of this theme of melancholy and sadness as opposed to traditional hellishness. So that's where we ended up going with this. So we wanted to complement this visually. But initially, this was my idea. I was like, let's do some pixel art. Pixel Gothic, particularly. The inspiration of this game I was playing at the time called Blasphemous, which is kind of dealing with religious trauma in a 2D Metroidvania context, which sounds really fun, doesn't it? The idea there was a red and black palette and very minimal, but I felt it was a little too edgy. It's kind of what it would be the simplest way for us to convey this visually, but we decided to take another look. And Geraint was very opposed to this because he had a dream. Geraint's dream was to have it a bit more fun, a bit more kind of cartoonish, and kind of represent the circles of hell in this descending layer. In Inferno, there's outside of Limbo, there's a character called Minos, and he judges sinners and he decides where they go. So they come into hell and Minos is like, what up? And wraps his tail around them as many times as the circle they're going to. So like, he's like, oh, you're going to lust. And he wraps his tail around them twice, essentially. Geraint had the idea of having him as the controller. So, you know, you click on an effect and there's some rad animation with Minos. Probably not that design, but we thought about it. There was also this idea of Beefcake Satan. We wanted a really muscular... I felt it was a little too playful and didn't necessarily match the Sonic aesthetic. Next up, I found out about William Blake and his existence. So this is getting into the idea of public domain classical art, which is a goldmine if you're like me and not really great at designing GUIs. William Blake was a 19th century poet, painter, and printmaker, and he was incredibly progressive for the time, in contrast to Dante. He was very hostile to the Church of England as well, and had his own belief system, which very much complicated his commissions for his prints on Inferno, because he was pretty diametrically opposed to a lot of what Dante was saying, but decided to do it anyway. But on a lot of his pieces, there are little snide like snipes at Dante. It's quite amusing. I won't go. But the quote that I have here is, whatever book is for vengeance for sin, and whatever book is against the forgiveness of sins is not of the Father, but of Satan, the accuser and the father of hell. So he went in like, but he died before they were finished. And he only got like, I think 6 illustrations done. So if we want a cohesive GUI, William Blake is unfortunately off the table, much as he seemed like a great guy. Gustave Doré, though, he's fair game. He's a 19th century French artist. He's really prolific, wood engravings for classical literature. So the Vulgate Bible, he did the Divine Comedy, and he also did Puss in Boots for some reason. And it's really disturbing. But so again, yeah, public domain, classical art. And I felt that the illustrations, the one on the left and the center, kind of illustrate the aesthetic of the effects that we were kind of talking about better than Blake's work. Blake's is a lot more surreal and colorful, where Doré is kind of like, you know, here's a man in a forest, in a good way. And we decided on, 1 illustration per circle. Touching briefly on the color palette, because this became a thing. So we decided on some sort of classical art and then approached colors. This was really a point of contention between us. Geraint and Lucius, the other guy I'm working with, were really pushing for colors. And I was kind of like, can we just make it black and white, please? Can it just be black and white? I found this color analysis of Inferno to back myself up. So the colors mentioned in Inferno are black/dark/somber, brown, red or vermilion, purple, dusky gray, or dusky and murky, and gray. So it's really this kind of black and white palette throughout. And we ultimately decided to constrain that palette to that after I managed to send them this document of someone doing a really in-depth analysis. And here are the slices. So here are the illustrations we settled on. These are, Dore's works cut into equal-sized slices. We threw a semi-opaque gradient on top of them just to kind of make the center pop a little bit more in the GUI. And we removed as much nudity as we possibly could. You would not believe how long I spent just being like, oh no, there's another genital. Let's. This is what we ended up with. There's not really much to say about it other than I think it looks rad. We're using Web UI for the GUI tech, but yeah, that's the GUI side. So taking a deep dive into the effects now. So we planned to do 9 effects, and we got 5 done in 2 months, which I'm pretty happy with. There's reasons we'll get to. I have a section on difficulties, so we'll talk about that in a bit. But the other things to know here are the circles were all in parallel. None of them were rooted into each other. And we sort of have plans to potentially internally intermix them at a later date. And I've just realized that I need audio but don't have a headphone jack. So I will start talking about Limbo, though. So, as mentioned, Limbo lacks any kind of punishment. It's got the Cool Poets Society, though. So all of Dante's problematic faves are here. So Virgil, who's guiding him, and Aristotle. It's kind of the Bill and Ted's Big Adventure prequel of the 14th century, I guess. As mentioned earlier, there's a theme of isolation and waiting. Other buzzwords I threw in are anticipation, inconsequentiality, hope, and apathy. We settled on a spectral reverb as the base for this, really, because we wanted to try and convey a sense of space that wasn't necessarily realistic. We wanted to convey this kind of strange soundscape. So yeah, convey anticipation but sad was the idea. I don't really know what to do about the lack of audio, because I do have a clip. Maybe I could play it at the end or something along those lines. Sorry? Oh yeah, that's not... Sorry. Oh, sweet. Cool. Let's see how this goes. So this is my clip for Limbo, if I can get it true. Oh God, where's my mouse? Pray this place.
There's a mini jack down here.
Oh, sweet. I don't know if that's audible. Sweet. Thank you. Thank you. There we go. So maybe I'll play that again because I feel like that was sort of lost in translation. So hopefully that makes you feel really lonely and sad on the inside, because that's what we were going for. There's this idea of a spectral simplifier, which I kind of, as I was panicking about not having audio, kind of glossed over. The idea being that in the spectral domain, we kind of start filtering out some of the non-dominant harmonics and start boosting the rest of them. I have a clip of that, full wet as well, just to give you an idea of what that can do. Hopefully my internet will work. Thanks, Dante. Very sad. Moving on then to gluttony. Gluttony is sinners in a swamp being held on with filthy ice and incessant hail. As I mentioned earlier, Shrek's holiday home. We went with a granular delay because we were like, what kind of sounds like rain? So we went with the granular delay. For the filthy aspect, we ended up randomizing the pitch and also randomizing the filter cutoff on each grain to give some sort of kind of wobbling sort of filthiness. And yeah, we really wanted to convey that idea of discomfort and filth. So I'll give you a clip of this. I'll try to. Hopefully that came through okay. I probably should have had the dry wet a little bit more wet, but that's what we ended up with for that. Heresy. This one, the heretics and the coffins, just to refresh you. I started with Geraint's Let's Write a Reverb talk. This was kind of the basis for this architecture. We wanted to make a reverb. We wanted to add some sort of drone. So we started there, and Geraint and I in the past had worked on this technique to let you have a stable but infinite reverb based around this, doing some cool maths. So we want to keep it infinite, auto level it, but we also wanted some form of distortion. And this was an accident. I messed up something with operator precedence and ended up with a really gnarly distortion on the reverb tail. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? Sent it to Geraint. Geraint was like, oh, it's doing this now. Just change this number and now it's controllable. So that's what we went to. It sort of resulted, as you'll hear, in a kind of ocean noise of distorted reverb, really. And I'll give you a clip. So I think we loosely achieved the brief of eternal and fiery with that. Again, this stuff is all so subjective that it's like, you could be like, oh, well, it's just a reverb. And yeah, probably, but how we arrived at it was through analyzing Dante Alighieri's poems. Violence has, as I mentioned, many, many forms of punishment. He really went to town on this one. Harpies and boiling blood were very much our focus, as I said, the kind of isolation, the forest kind of vibe. And we started with pretty simple gain-shaped distortion, so a fuzz and a soft clip, pretty much. And it ended up being a little bit too boss metal zone for my liking. It was a little bit too predictable to me. It was a little bit too like metal for the sake of it without really actually adhering to the theme. It was just kind of a rad distortion. So I took influence here from Link Wray's Rumble, which is a 50s kind of, I guess, yeah, rock song that was banned in the US for inciting violence among youths, which I thought was very on brand. So I wanted to try and take influence from that. And yeah, the sense of utter despair in the forest, we went with the slapback to add the sense of isolation, which also kind of fits with Link Wray's whole thing he was doing at the time. So yeah, this is, as I call it, the softback clip slap in action. Oh. Or not. I'm not really sure what happened at the end there. I don't know how my guitar did that. It was pretty cool, though. That's violence. Treachery is the last one we got done in the time. And this was where, trapped in a lake of ice, Satan is eating Judas, Brutus, and Cassius for funsies. Geraint really took the lead on this one, and I will not pretend to understand a lot of the intricacies of what we ended up with. One thing, though, was we wanted to focus on those three heads of Satan and kind of have some sort of analogy to that. We did that by having three parallel streams, having an unaffected one, and then a pitch shift on the other two. Originally, it was hard-coded at tritones, which sounded hellish, but it was not the most musically usable in a lot of cases, which, it would be nice if it was musically usable. So we have that pitch shift idea for Satan's heads. And we also took a look at, as I mentioned earlier, kind of grime references, people like Rabbit and that kind of, UK grime sound with really icy, sort of glassy high end. There's another track as well called Icy Lake by Dat Oven, which really conveys that sort of iciness. So we did some spectral analysis on that. And here's what we ended up with. If I could find my cursor. And there's our icy sounds. So those are all the circles that we got done in the time frame. And here is why. There was a perfect storm of things that happened with this plugin. Firstly, we decided to use my framework, which I was still writing as we started working on the plugin, which meant that as I was trying to fix effects, I'd have framework breaks. And as I tried to fix framework breaks, the effects would break. And also calling it a framework actually is a little self-inflating. It's very much an abstraction layer over the clap wrappers, really. At the time, I think I was quite afraid to deviate from the juice paradigm. And I think the framework was really kind of echoing that sort of hesitation and made it quite tricky to work with, because if I'm trying to do juice, then I may as well just use juice. And I sort of realized that halfway through development, but I was like, it's kind of too late to change my mind on this right now. And it was very poorly tested and not battle tested. So yeah, this was plagued by GUI breaks, library breaks, framework breaks, and mental breaks. It was one of the most harrowing developer experiences of my entire life, I would say. Being someone who was pulled all-nighters trying to fix bugs for work, this really took the cake as an absolute nightmare. This is pretty much how I describe the process. U-turns into oncoming traffic, but GoPro footage of a car crash was how I felt most of the time. Gluttony gave me an aneurysm, as did Limbo. Limbo had the gnarliest bug I think I've ever come across, which we lost 3 days to. Essentially, the FFT turned into a high-pass filter overnight, and high-pass filter at 10K. Cue 3 days of debugging only to find it's because I turned on the fast math flag. So, yeah, everyone had other commitments, including myself, that it was quite hard to wrangle the team, not being a product manager or a project manager or anything along those lines myself as well. It was a perfect storm. But we ended up with an almost finished plugin. And I'm just going to play a clip of all of the circles in at the same time to kind of give you a feel of what it sounds like in general. This is what I call music to stare at light bulbs to, this recording. So I hope you enjoy it. You know what I mean about the light bulb thing? Yeah. So, the question being, did we succeed in our goal? You know, wrapping things up now, did we succeed in the original goal? And the answer is maybe. I think the beauty of this approach is what I call transient goalposts. There's no real, this was exactly what it was supposed to be, because what it was supposed to be was a exploration of trying to convey moods and that kind of thing. So that's great for self-fulfillment and feeling good about yourself. It's not great for project management, as I discovered. But yeah, we kind of embraced the happy accidents and weren't afraid to scrap ideas, refocus, as you saw with violence. So yeah, did it sound hellish? Again, subjective. It's actually quite nice sounding, unfortunately, I think. But it is definitely unsettling, I hope. And that's kind of all I can ask for. Things that didn't work out were really the time frame. We really wanted to have something that we could be like, hey, here's a free download code, mess around with it. You know, we want to share this thing we've worked on. Unfortunately, that did not happen because of the time frame. Ideally, we would have signposted milestones, specific dates, that sort of thing. And yeah, human wrangling was really the what I think the issue was. But finally, do I think it's rad? Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely love it. So, in closing, why should you care? I think that my hope by going through Inferno in excruciating detail was to get people's creative juices flowing in the audience and try and, I don't know, encourage people to break the mold with designing plugins. Not that I think there's anything wrong with starting thinking about making a tool, but there is something quite freeing about just discarding a lot of that and being like, I want to make something that sounds really cool in a certain way. So really, that's why I've gone so far into it. And yeah, what does your personal hell sound like? I'd love to hear it. I love that there's no wrong answer with this approach, like I just mentioned. And it's very helpful as a creative blocker sort of breaker. You think of some abstract sentence and go, let's turn that into a plugin. And suddenly you're not like, oh, I don't know what to work on next. You have this antidote to a lack of plugin ideas. And finally, because it's fun. And yeah, that's basically my talk. Any questions?